It's good to see all of you here this evening, and I'm have my helpers passing out all of our lesson sheets. Hang on to these things if you will, and they're not the best in the world, but they're what we've got tonight. Now, what I promised last week that I would bring back my, and I'm telling this as a joke, my pew book. Not my pew Bible, but my pew book, because it actually stretches the length of one pew when you unfold it. And we talked about the fact that this time chart of biblical history is so fascinating because it involves something that you personally are involved in even right now, and that is the history of God's people. And if you are a Christian, then you're certainly a part of that history. And if you're not a Christian, you're still going to be a part of the history of man. So, if you're looking up at the picture on the screen, you're looking at the time chart of biblical history. And there were several people that come down and wanted to look at it again. So what I'm going to do is, after the class is over, I'm going to put this book over on the pew. Don't take it home with you, but you can look at it. It's certainly a lot to look at, and it helps us to understand that we're part of that. And I brought some newspapers about the 1893 Oklahoma land run. And I asked myself, tonight I said, as we look at this, I'm going to use it as a visual aid, and I'm going to start by asking some questions. First of all, about the Israelites. How bad did the Israelites want a land that was their own? Well, the scriptures tell us just how bad they wanted a land of their own, but why did they want it? How bad do you want to be? How bad do you want a place of your own? As a young man, I can tell you, I wanted something real bad. When I come out of the military, I didn't have anything but a wife and one child, and I wanted something for myself and for my family that followed me. And so I set about doing those things that will help me to get a place of my own. How many of you want to have a place? How many of you don't have a place of your own to live? Nobody? Everybody's got a place to live? Very good. But how bad did you want it when you bought it? Bob, how bad did you want your house?
I didn't want to rent it.
You didn't want a rent house, did you? Okay. You wanted something? Anybody? How bad did you want the house that you now have? Pretty bad, isn't it? Well, anyway, we're going to be looking at our first lesson period. We shared the way that we would examine the evidence, and it was by induction or inductive, by observation, interpretation, and application. By using this method, we can arrive at a definitive truth, something that we can look at and say, that's absolute, I know that's true. We examined a time chart of biblical history that covered our little picture up here now. It covers 4,000 years of history of man and God. It shows us the evidence of how man, as well as God, has a desire to come together. You see, God not only wanted you to come to him, but man has a desire to come to his Creator. He may not realize it, but he does. Men desire a place where they can meet with God, and God provided the place. And even today, through the church, God works to bring us to where we can live with him in fellowship. And what is the motivation? What is your motivation to worship God or to worship? What is your motivation? Do you really want it? Paradise. Because there's something greater even than what you're involved in right now, isn't it? And you have a faith that you're going to receive something greater than what you now have. And so if you really wanted a home for yourself and your family, shouldn't you want a home with God that is an eternal home. You don't have to worry about the rent. You don't have to worry about paying the gas bill, the water bill, buying groceries. God says, that's all gone. I'm going to take care of you. Very briefly, I would like to present you with evidence of man's past desires to possess what he can truly say is his place in the scheme of things, you know. We all have a story to tell, and we have young men telling their story of how they were converted to Christianity, how they come to know God, how they wanted to know, and why they wanted to know God. Here at night, I think it's, and I said this before and I'll say it again, I think it's one of the really wonderful things that we can do is to help people share their story. Now, the Jews never had a place or a land of their own. And they wanted a place they could come together and worship God. And people coming to America reflected this same idea. I don't know how many of you have relatives that come from Europe, England, France, Germany. Where did they come from? They all came here with the same desire, is to have something that they couldn't have somewhere else. And so we see the land run in Oklahoma reflects that desire. And I thought I'd just show you a few pictures about the Oklahoma land run of 1893. And what I did was I went through all these. I have several newspapers here that I went through, and I was just looking, and I'm saying, I'm going to read some names. I just has nothing to do with anything other than I thought about the fact that there could be some of the relatives of these people here in this congregation and tonight. I know I'm one, so all of you are not as old as I am, but I'm sure that you may have relatives that were part of the settling of Oklahoma. Patterson, Williams, Newton, Dyer, Weavers. Grandma Weaver was even there. And that ring a bell, Harold? Well, anyway, that was the name that popped up. Caskey, Fords, Tallies, Fergusons, Meade, Geyer, Thompson, Bickford, Dresser, Pratt, and of course I put my name down on there, Brandon. My name wasn't in the newspapers. Now those names appear, not all the names. I didn't have time to do all that work. But there's a lot of names that appear in those newspapers that tell me that these relatives were somewhere around. I don't know what you were doing, but they were in Oklahoma, and they were part of this particular land run. And I said, boy, that's great. My name's not in there, like I say, and I wasn't even looking for my name because I figured my grandma's word's good enough, so Grandma and Grandpa. What? When was it? Oh, well, in Oklahoma.
No, in 1889, one of them had two of them.
Well, I know, but this one is in 1893.
Why not? That's why I asked you, where's the land run?
Was in Oklahoma. Okay, the specific part of Oklahoma, it's okay, we're going to call it the Cherokee Strip, is what the paper calls it. It's north. Well, anyway. Okay. The run's downhill, don't it? And it's red. Oh, okay. Okay. That's all right, folks. I'm used to it. How bad do you think these people wanted to, and I'm going to change my, I'm doing the right way. See, I'm a quick learner. And you didn't, and my man that helped me with this is sitting back there smiling, saying that he took those pictures, didn't you? Yeah. Oh, okay. Here we have a man, you notice he's holding the stakes, he's on his horse, and that did come out pretty good, didn't it? Okay, that was the start of the land run. We're gonna go to a next one, and there was the actual start. There was a picture. You notice it's kind of blurry and dusty, and then when you go look and you look further into these pictures, now right here is one of the newspapers that says there was 100,000 people that arrived by the Rock Island Railroad. Here's a picture of it. Now you can tell these people were just piling in. I mean, how bad did all these people want a piece of land? How bad did they all want something that they could say, you know, this is mine. And it's going to be mine as long as I can hold on to it. And there were some times that there were people, and you didn't get a deed. You got a land patent. And this land patent had your name on it. But if you didn't prove up on it, you didn't actually improve the value of it during the year, then you could lose it. And you know, that really sparked my imagination when we talked to people about being faithful to Christ. And I said, you know, that's it. People don't understand. You can lose what you have as a Christian. And that's a sad, sad thing, isn't it? If you willingly let go of God, He's not going to force you to hold on to Him. He's going to encourage you. But here are all these people, they wanted this stuff so bad, they were willing to suffer all kinds of things. Now this right here is a picture of I think it was 2 months after the land run was over. This building was up, and the town, there was a town there. And if you had ridden across the prairie as a cowboy 6 months ago, and you come back this way, and you're going to say, what? I didn't know there was a town here. Did I miss that? Did I miss something? Well, it's been 6 months. You know, how long does it take in Oklahoma to build a town? Well, actually about 2 weeks. So here they have everything's up and going. And this man, this white mule was the mule that he actually used during the land run, and it was still alive when this picture was taken. It was 5 years old when he was in the land run with it, and he said, I'm holding on to that. It's good luck, I guess, but he had a mule. Now, here is the picture that I want you to really look at. Here is a picture of a family that made the land run, and here they are in their first home in Oklahoma. Can you tell what it is? It's a dugout, and there is a difference between a dugout and a sod house. I don't know. Did I get a picture of a sod house in there too? I think I got one, didn't I? All right. Thank you, Marty. Marty took the pictures for me, so if they're really out of focus, it's his fault. But, and it's not because the papers were brown and old, but here's a man, he's got everything that he values right there with him. And if you look real close, he's got his horse. Oh, I turned back to my, okay, here we are. He's got his horse, there's no place to tie his horse. You need to understand, in Oklahoma, the prairie there's no trees. And especially in the Cherokee Strip, there was nothing but grass. I remember the history books telling us that, I was trying to remember the Spanish guy that come across Oklahoma was Cortez, yeah. He said that the grass was as high as the belly of his horse. And he said, there were no trees, period. There were no trees. And you know, really up in that part of Oklahoma, that's the truth. But you notice this man, he has a few logs on top. It's a hole in the ground, folks, dug back in the bank with a shovel. And there's logs on top of it, and you have to stop and ask yourself, why were there logs on top of it? Well, there were logs on top of it to keep the buffaloes and the cows from caving in into your living room. But he has his horse. He's holding on to his horse because there's no place to tie it. But he has his baby, he has his wife, and that baby was, and I'm going to start and go back here. Every time I didn't even have to touch those arrows. They're so sensitive. Well, anyway, you saw it. What? Start it over? Okay, I'm going to start over. It ain't starting. How's my man up there? Is he going? Okay, okay. But what I want you to notice in the picture is, what are the things that you notice? It caught my attention right away. There was his baby, his wife, his horse, and their house. But right in front of them, if you take a close look at it, this man and his wife have a fruit jar with a plant in it, full of water. Now, to me, that tells me one thing. Okay, get us back to the last picture. You're doing good. We have to raise your pay here. Oh, here we are. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but right by the woman's left hand down there, there's a fruit jar full of water, if you can see it. And there's a plant in it. Now, I have a theory to that plant. What was there? It is a sweet potato, because they're going to plant it in the spring, I guess. But there is one place in all of this mess of pictures where it says the year of the turnip. The year of the turnip. And the reason they said it was the year of the turnip, because they didn't have time to plant anything but turnips. And so the first year of life that they had in Oklahoma Territory, they had a lot of turnips. And that turnips were a big business. And I even have a picture. I don't think I've got the picture, but it's in there in the newspapers. And you're welcome to look at these newspapers. I'm going to leave them on the bench up here so you can see them after class. But tonight, I want you to think about these people and what they were willing to sacrifice and what they were willing to endure. And when their relatives look back on, this is the first year that we had, they're going to ask themselves, how did they do it? How did they sacrifice? And you know, sometimes when we talk about Christ and the church and the Christians and even the people here at Choctaw, I've been around long enough that this building, I was here before this building ever was. And I asked myself, how many sacrifices were made on behalf of establishing the Lord's family at this place? And I think that that's one of the greatest things that you could do, is to establish God's family in this place. Now, we're living during that time, but we didn't see all the sacrifices. We didn't experience them, but there was somebody that was willing to sacrifice something so that you and I could have what we now have. As far as the physical plant, the physical buildings and all this stuff, it was paid for by a lot of hard sweat and blood. And people that were making, I got to remember what I was making back then. I think I was making $2.50 an hour, which was big pay then. You know, I thought it was pretty good. But when I first started to work, I was making 35 cents an hour at the University Hospital. And I thought that was pretty great because they gave me all I could eat, you know, so that was it. I was sold. I was going to school. So as we look at this, as citizens, we're going to tonight we're going to talk about C.S.I. Choctaw, Mount Sinai, and Mount Zion. If you're looking at your sheet, well, you're going to in just a minute, as citizens of the United States, we should all be familiar with the Constitution of the United States, the laws that govern our country. The origin of any law tells us the authority or the power behind the law. The Constitution of the USA originated in the minds of men that led our country at the time of its inception, enforceable only in the lands controlled by the United States. Now let's focus on religious and spiritual laws. Who has the right to tell me how to worship and what God I can worship? Well, no one in the United States. But you know, there's a lot of things about this that you need to understand. There are many gods, many places to worship, many different spiritual laws to guide people, but all of them are limited because the men who instituted them are limited in their power to enforce them. How can I identify the God of heaven's laws separate from all the other laws by accepting the Bible as my authority of how to worship correctly. You see, you can argue all day long about religion, but until you first agree that it is the Bible that is the authority in your religious life, you don't really have a lot to argue about or even discuss, because they're not really going to understand you. Peter and John's reply to the Sanhedrin command answers our question. Acts 4 and verses 18 through 19, Peter and John were told direct, point blank, you quit preaching in this name of Jesus or we're going to cause you a world of hurt. Now that come from the religious people of the Jews. They said, you quit preaching about this man Jesus. And they said, you tell us, shall we obey the laws of men rather than God? And one Jew who was very smart, he told them, said, now stop and think about it, folks. If they're doing wrong, God's going to make them fail. If they're doing right, we're fighting against God. So let's be careful what we do to these men. Peter and John's reply to the Sanhedrin command answers our questions. The command then to stop preaching in the name of Jesus. All right. Our lesson today deals with God's laws, which are not limited because the one who gave the law is unlimited in heaven and on earth. Now, complete C.S.I, complete scriptural investigation to examine what cannot lie, the evidence. So, here we have the title, Mount Zion, Mount Sinai, and Mount Zion. This is the history of man coming into contact with God's law. On the third day after the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea, they camped at Mount Sinai, where Moses delivers God's commands to the people. The law of Moses, or the Ten Commandments, as we often refer to them as, this was God's covenant with Israel. We will find that Mount Sinai in the Old Testament and Mount Zion, and I'm going to spell both of those. Mount Sinai is S-I-N-A-I in the Old Testament. Mount Zion, Z-I-O-N in the New Testament, but they are directly paralleled with one another because they identify in both cases God's people and God's laws for them. So who has the right to tell me how to worship God? God. He's going to tell me. I'm going to turn to Exodus 19, verses 5 through 6. In Exodus 19, in verses 5 through 6, we find the writer of Exodus telling us, of course, this is God speaking, now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. Now that's God telling Moses, this is what I want you to say. I don't want them to misunderstand. And so, as we read this, you would think after witnessing all that God had done for them, the 10 plagues against Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea on dry ground, and the destruction of the Egyptian army in Exodus 19 and 4, then they could surely believe that God was capable of taking care of them in any situation. Sometimes we just don't trust God enough. God's going to take care of this congregation. He's going to take care of me as an individual. We want to have trust in God, and yet the world always seems to pull us back into, but what if a tornado comes? What if this? What if that? But here's what he told them. He said, Moses is told to meet with God on Mount Sinai. Go back down and tell them to wash their clothes and be ready in 3 days. Exodus 19, verse 11. What does washing your clothes have to do with being ready to meet God? I want to tell you something. If I'm going to meet God, I want to be clean. And I know what dirt is. I used to come in, and my wife, I worked as a mechanic for a big trucking company. Every night I come in, And when we were first married, my wife told me, she said, you will come in the back door, you will strip all your clothes off, and you will throw them over in the corner, because she said they are filthy, dirty, greasy. And she said, I don't want them coming in my house. Now, I respected my wife. One time I forgot, but she let me know about it. She said, I thought I told you to put all your dirty clothes out there. I said, okay, I'm sorry. But I really wasn't thinking, was I? I was tired, I was wore out, and sometimes that's the way we get with God. You know, we're tired, we're wore out, and we don't want to do what God says, or we say, well, he'll forgive me. God tells Moses to warn the people not to touch the mountain, set up a boundary around the mountain, and the people were not to cross it. Even an animal was not supposed to touch that boundary that God set. I love that sermon that Mike preached here about 2 weeks ago. He said there were some exceptions, but there were some that were non-exceptions to God's rules. There are some things that God says, this is the way it's going to be, period. And we need to be serious about that. When people come to us and asking about, well, do we really have to partake of the Lord's Supper? Do we really have to be baptized? I say, no, you don't have to, but you certainly get to. And so we have an opportunity to obey God. Let's take that opportunity to do so. As you read this, this is a serious business, this meeting with God thing, isn't it? Being baptized into Christ, worshiping Him on Sunday, on the first day of the week, having the Lord's Supper. Is this really serious business? Absolutely. It is serious business. And so on the third day, the mountain shook, the smoke came, the lightning struck, because God ascended, and Moses is called up to receive the laws of God for his people. How do you think Moses felt when God says, I want you to come up and get the laws from me? And then you take them down and give them to the people. You know, one of the hardest jobs that a preacher has is preaching the truth. Because sometimes the truth slaps you in the face like somebody hit you with the 2x4. When I became a Christian, one day I realized that I was living a lie. I felt that I was saved all along. Because as a child, I'd been baptized, yeah. Baptized in the creek, baptized in the tub, baptized in a lot of, matter of fact, I've been baptized so many times I couldn't count them. I said, if that's it, oh man, I got this made. But you know what? I was living a lie because I was lying to myself. I said, no, that's not the baptism that God's talking about. I need to get straight with God. I need to be baptized into Christ for the right reason, in the right way, for the right thing. Sometimes we fool ourselves and we want to do it. We want to do things and say, well, that's just it. But we see that Moses gave the law on Mount Sinai, which is a shadow of Christ, giving us God's law on Mount Zion. The prophecy of the coming of Christ in the church. We will now examine some Old Testament scriptures that use the word Z-I-O-N, Zion. It's a symbol of the church. Micah 4. Let's go over to Micah chapter 4 in the Old Testament. Excuse me. Micah chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on top of the mountains. Now you notice it says, shall be established on top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow into it. Many nations will come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion the law will go forth, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. We're looking at information. We're looking at evidence that will help us to identify the Lord's church, God's church, the one that he established through Christ. And so as we look at this evidence, we have to ask ourselves, well, do I really believe it? And an almost identical reading of these same verses is found in Isaiah 2 in verses 2 through 3. All these things will come to pass in the last days, referring, now we can go into a long study of the last days, referring to the Christian dispensation of time. Now we must identify the mountain of the Lord's house. The scriptures call it the house of the God of Jacob, Ephesians 2 and verse 19. Christians are called the household of God. Thus the church is the house of God. Thus the mountain of the house of the Lord is the church. It was established in the last days on the day of Pentecost when Peter preached the gospel with the rest of the apostles in Micah 4 and verse 2. The law will go forth out of Zion and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. It symbolizes the spiritual mountain of the Lord. The mountain is called Zion, and the Lord will reign over them on Mount Zion from henceforth forever and ever. I want you to go now with me to Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, and we're going to read chapter 12 and verses 18 through 29. Hebrews chapter 12 and verses 18 through 29. Now the Hebrew writer is trying to convince the Jews to listen to what the message is. And he says, "For you have not come to the mountain that may be touched and that burned with fire and blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of the words, so that those who hear it begged that the word should not be spoken to them anymore. For they could not endure what was commanded. And if so much as a beast touch the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow. And so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I am exceedingly afraid and tremble. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn, who are registered in heaven, to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of the Spirit of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. See that you do not refuse him who speaks, for if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth, but now he has promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also heaven. Now this, yet once more, indicates the removal of the things that are being shaken as of things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. For our God is a consuming fire. Using all these parallels, Mount Sinai, Mount Zion, and as you read these verses, the spelling of the word Zion here is actually the Greek spelling, and it's spelled S-I-O-N in English. Christians are not subject to the old law, but the law given by Christ. Zion is a figurative description of the church. First, Mount Zion is called the heavenly Jerusalem. Zion is called the general assembly, those who have been called together by the gospel. Zion is called the church of the firstborn, verse 23. Zion is a symbol of the church. Verse 23 again says the names are written in heaven. Philippians 4 and verse 3, Christians' names are written in the book of life. Verse 23, the spirit of just men made perfect. Now this word perfect means complete. Christians are to come unto Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant. The Israelites washed their clothes as they came to Mount Sinai. Christians are washed in the blood of Christ as they come to Mount Zion. It's the blood of Christ that cleanses us from sin. It's the blood of Christ that washes us and we come out whole. God's arrival at Mount Sinai was on the third day. Christ rose from the grave the third day. Mount Zion is a definite symbol of the church. I want us to read Isaiah 28 and verse 16. Isaiah chapter 28 and verse 16. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I lay in Zion a stone for a foundation, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, sure foundation. Whoever believes will not act hastily. Jesus is that tried and precious cornerstone, the foundation of Zion, the church. Now we go to Joel 2, and we're going to look at Joel chapter 2 and verses 32. And it shall come to pass that whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be deliverance, as the Lord has said, among the remnant whom the Lord calls. Now, Revelation 14 and verse 1 will be the last scripture that we're going to read. Chapter 14 and verse 1. Then I looked and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. God knows who are his. God prepares for those who are his. And as you come to this, the Israelites served God around a physical mountain. It was Sinai. But Christians serve him around the spiritual mountain, Zion. How can I be saved from sin and death? Would you come to Mount Zion to serve the Lord? And what we come down to is, the end of this lesson is, do you accept the evidence that God gives you to prove that you're his? You know, as a farmer, I knew every piece of livestock that I had. And you know why? I had a brand on it. I had a brand on that critter, and he was mine. God puts a brand on you. And that brand is, you're going to experience in baptism. You wondered what baptism is all about? It's not just something that happens to you. It's something that you become because of it. You belong to God. And you become his. I don't know how to end all this, but if there's any questions or comments, if you want to talk about the land run and how desperately those people wanted something that was their own, to be a part of something that was greater than anything they'd ever done in their life. I read these newspaper stories, and you think, boy, they had it rough. And you know, sometimes that's what it takes. Our next lesson is going to deal with when the Israelites were in, what do they call? The wilderness. Was Oklahoma a wilderness? Absolutely. It was a bad wilderness. But the people were willing to come and to challenge the wilderness because of what they were going to receive. And it wasn't because they were just hungry for land. They were people who didn't have anything. I'm reading some of these stories, and I was going to kid Harold, because it showed a woman in there and it said, "This is Grandma Weaver." And I saw a picture of her. It said, she was making bonnets and she was selling them. You know, that's pretty inspirational, isn't it? Boy, she did everything she could do. But here was the woman growing a sweet potato vine, you know. What would you have done had you received such a great 160 acres? Have you ever received a gift that big? That was our bill, wasn't it? Okay. What's the greatest gift you've ever received? Just stop and think about it. I thought the greatest gift that I ever received at one time was, now you're going to laugh, 41 Ford, had 100,000 miles on it, smoked like a freight train because it was my first car. It was my first car. That was the greatest thing I'd ever received. And of course, it didn't last very long. But you know, I really appreciated that car. And my dad didn't give it to me. I earned it, I guess, because I throwed papers and I worked for the hospital. Man, I accumulated that money and that's how bad I wanted it. I wanted that car bad. Do you want to please God? How bad do you want to please God? Well, I want to please Him every way I possibly can because I trust Him. I trust Him to hold me in the palm of His hand or whatever you want to call it. I trust God, and I trust Him so much that I'm willing to do whatever He tells me that I need to be doing. I may not fully understand it sometimes, just like a child. As a child growing up, my grandfather told me, he said, don't play in the road. I never did understand that. Well, Grandpa, we live out in the middle of nowhere. And that's another story. Nowhere, Oklahoma. We live out in the middle of nowhere. He said, I don't want you playing in the road. But there's nobody coming down the road but once or twice a day. I don't want you playing in the road. I'll whip you if you do. Well, as older I got, I suddenly realized that I had an uncle that played in the road, and he had been run over in the road. And he wasn't right bright anymore. And how many cars passed that day? One. One passed our house that day. That was it. But that's all it took. But my grandfather, he always wanted to warn me about things that I couldn't understand, but I certainly needed. And thank you for your class tonight. If you want to see these, I'm going to spread them out on the bench. You can take a quick look at them, or